Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Heike, and today I have two guests with me, and I'm starting alphabetically with the first name. Martin, please introduce yourself.
My pleasure to be here, Heike. I'm Martin Pankraz. I'm part of Azure Core, doing mostly SAP there, co-engineering with SAP, and also helping the security product groups to have the best possible integration towards the SAP security ecosystem.
I think I know what the topic is about, but let's first have Will introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hi folks, it's Will King, part of the OneSOC team, Microsoft Sentinel, and our team develops the solutions for business applications, including SAP. So hopefully we'll get down into the agentless connector today.
Yes, so you already talked about it or said it. Awesome. So we are going to talk about the agentless connectors for Sentinel, but there's also SAP a big part of that topic. And before we dive deeper into Martin, I hope that everybody knows what SAP is, but let's talk a little bit why it is so important to also protect SAP environments.
Actually, the SAP ecosystem is like a vast conglomerate of software, but mostly when we talk about SAP, we mean the enterprise resource planning component, which actually runs the business. That can be your HR department, it can be finance, it can be supply chain, basic like payroll. So it runs practically your whole enterprise. So in terms of security talk, this means SAP down, business down. So you cannot do anything anymore.
Not just down, but also it has super valuable information in it for the enterprise.
Exactly. Some keep their internal IP there. How to produce something. They can be, I said, payroll before. And it ranges through personal data towards competitive information. That you want to keep secret.
So and then with Sentinel, you can gather logs and information about what exactly?
That's a good point. We have like dedicated rules that consume information that's relevant to protecting those systems. And those, again, touch user data, what types of things they have access to, what do they execute, and where do the SAP data travel, so to say. And we have various sources for this.
So I would assume that you need to understand and know SAP to understand what are the data that you want to collect. It's not any security persona at this customer environment. So how is this usually structured in the enterprises you work with? Is there like a specific person that focuses on SAP security?
Well, ranges. So depending on if it's a very large customer or a smaller one, if it's sometimes it becomes one person, then they have a difficult job. Or you have a dedicated team who does SAP security with Sentinel. And we at Microsoft, we do this as well because we are one of the largest SAP customers in the world. The Microsoft business runs on SAP. Every Xbox we sell, every M365 license we sell goes through those systems. And when you go on business travel, Heike, you also run through certain SAP touch points and your all the things we have in SuccessFactors, so to say, our HR product suite for this.
Okay, and then is it complicated to connect Sentinel to SAP?
Well, if you have the right people, it's a fast exercise. I think Will managed within a couple of hours with one of the early preview customers of the Agentless Connector. But we'll get into some of the details and have a look in the UI so you will get to see for yourself how simple it is nowadays.
So, Will, you mentioned the agentless connectors. I would assume there is a non-agentless connector. There was or is? Tell me more about it.
Right, exactly. So up until now, there has been a Docker-based agent which runs on a virtual machine in the customer environment. That's been in GA for a few years now. And the agent historically has been quite challenging for our customers because SAP is already complex, as Martin's alluded to. And when our customers need to add additional layers such as virtual machines and all of the networking and firewalls that go along with it, the configuration overheads tend to be quite high, at least during the initial installation time, where you have to get everyone round to configure all of the ports and everything else that needs to be done, as well as all the patching of that virtual machine as well. So, in fact, that was one of the major drivers behind our agentless offering, is that we wanted to simplify the whole experience for customers. So that's driven some of the decision making behind our latest offering.
So we're looking at that screen. It means you needed the different a collector agent VM and then a cluster running on some. So all of this bucket is now not needed anymore. But we still, of course, we have the log analytics workspace, and then we have the whole SAP region on the other side.
Kind of yes and no. So we still do need some collection infrastructure, but we've essentially shifted it up into the SAP cloud, which is aligned with the SAP vision for where their customers are going. So while SAP itself tends to be still somewhat of a legacy platform that's typically on premises for the customer, it could also be hosted in Azure or in the new RISE environment for SAP. The shift really is from having that infrastructure that's running the containers, which could be Kubernetes, you can see in the middle there, or on a virtual machine. And it's that piece that we're moving into the SAP BTP cloud. And that significantly improves the experience for setup and deployment, because we're now using those components that the SAP team is familiar with. And we don't need to bring in the middleman, if you like, who's the network team or the virtual machine infrastructure or cloud team.
So you mentioned before there is a lot of customers that have SAP on premises. So what about those? They still then need the SAP cloud, and they have it because it is part of the SAP environment? Or do they have this then also on premise? Like, how does that work?
Right, exactly. So nowadays, most customers, and Martin, you may have some stats available, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere like upward of 90% of all of the SAP customers have now SAP BTP, Business Technology Platform. And that's equivalent of like Microsoft Azure, I always think, for SAP. And those customers who use BTP will have access to something called a cloud connector. And the cloud connector is the component that allows brokering of connection between the SAP cloud and the SAP backend system, and it's cloud agnostic. It could be on-prem, AWS, Azure, or wherever, including SAP hosted cloud.
Well, you can compare it to our Microsoft on-premises data gateway or the self-hosted integration runtime. Yeah, for those are more familiar with our proxies to achieve the same thing. Yeah?
Okay, that's cool. And the agentless connector, just for me to understand, do we have more agentless connectors for different solutions, or is this now a specific one only for SAP? I mean, in this episode, we will talk about this one, but are there other agentless connectors now available?
You could say that, yeah. We have SAP publishing connectors for parts of their solution, partners in the ecosystem, and we have a community way of doing this. Yeah, and I will show you a bit later how that looks like. And yeah, you could say that. Yeah, we have one official one for ERP, but we are going beyond that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So compared, Martin, to the previous picture, I feel like this looks more complicated. The other one had like, two little things, and now I see a whole whatever BTP is, and then help me out there.
Well, you could see it that way. We're giving the details here that connects with the SAP persona at the customer. So when they can find the terminology, the words, the service names, so that they immediately know, okay, this is where I pick up my work, and this is where my handover to the SOC is. And basically, the rest arrow here, where it says integration suite to Sentinel, this is where the only handshake is. Everything downstream is handled by the SAP team at the customer. And this is where the speed up is, because they know how to do this. They have SAP support for this. They have guidance, best practice training for all of this, which is not necessarily there for the Docker runtime, for Kubernetes, and the firewall hassle that comes with it.
But it's a good call out because SAP is a complex landscape. But for the SAP persona, this is their bread and butter. For us, all of these terminologies, these acronyms, it's like somebody walking into Microsoft for the first time. They're a bit blinded by everything. But for the SAP person, this is standard stuff.
And is there any challenge for customers with like permissions, who can access, what to access, anything that we would like to help them?
We have a predefined role that is listed on our docs that SAP customers just import into their landscape, and it's scoped to what is needed for the connector, and also provided in a form that the SAP person knows how to deal with.
Good. And then the data flows into, I can see Microsoft Defender XDR, Microsoft Sentinel, which is now part of Microsoft Defender. And how does it look like? Is this like events, alerts? It's a report. What do we see there?
That's multiple things, actually. And I have that available here. The content is largely similar to what we had before. So the customers coming from agent-based, going to agentless, can continue to run their operations as is, because the analytic rules are the same, the watch list, the workbooks, all the content we already had and that customers love from the past years continues to run. And you just go to the Content Hub and start using. And we have a new refreshed Data Connectors UI for agentless.
Okay, and then you see here all the little content names, and someone with SAP knowledge, for that person, this is just clear what all of this is. SAP, AGR, flags, and things.
Yes. But this speaks mostly to the SAP security savvy persona. And we're providing parsers and the right language to make it simpler for the SOC analyst as well. But this ties back to your question initially, who's consuming this and to what level? Because the SOC analyst mostly cares about, is this a productive system? And has this been part of a larger investigation that is going on? While as the SAP person needs to look at, okay, do I need to maybe make changes to the backends? Do I see things that I don't want to see there, but doesn't impact my entire security posture?
Yeah. Can I compare this to, let's say, data loss prevention or something, right? So where we say, okay, this document was touched or this information was read by a person that shouldn't. Like, what is all this information?
Well, the SAP audit log really records everything that is happening on the back end. Some user opened the financial transactions and viewed the payroll information of the CEO, let's say, if that's even allowed through, because you failed already on GRC on the SAP backend, if that happened. But these types of things are recorded. What are you opening? What are you changing? And in regards to the use cases we mentioned before, HR, supply chain, finance, these types of things.
So now that we have that agentless connector, do we get additional data, different data, enriched data? Is there anything new to the data that's coming?
The data is not new. It's really just the capability how it's being loaded differently. Everything that is new, faster, yes, very true.
And less complex, yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Just on that point, we have made efforts to improve the simplicity of the data. So all of those tables there that you see, the SAP underscore user 1, 2, 3, and so on, we've consolidated those into centralized tables so that we call it user master data, which includes, for example, role authorizations, user details for the SAP users using the system. And this has simplified and kind of added a normalization layer on top of that data.
So, and then obviously we need to have some logic or like analytics rules and things in Sentinel that makes also or include alerts to incidents. Do we have an example of an incident that includes SAP possible, I don't know, leakage or something?
Yeah, there's financial fraud, for instance. That's one of the incidents we're also having in the platform. And in general, you can, of course, configure the alerts to be populated as incidents in your platform. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And we also have the XDR integration. Okay, so one of the benefits of having this SAP connector is that we're bringing in signals from SAP as well as partner systems, right, Martin? SAP partner systems that I know that you've been working with. We'll be sending data to this kind of central audit log table, and that table then can be picked up by XDR, and we can get all of the benefits of having the Defender correlations run against that as well. And so, yeah, the analytics layer, as you're talking about, we've gone to a lot of effort to make sure that customers who are on the agent, who are using the sort of old schemas and Log Analytics V1, they're not going to be impacted by this change. So this will work seamlessly for them. As soon as they turn on the agent less, they will benefit from some work that we've done using parsers, KQL layer, to essentially present the data as if it were as it was when it was produced by the agent.
That was my next question, Will. So what about people that are using the agent version today and they want to migrate to the agentless? Like, how is that migration process?
Before we go to migration guides and all of this technical things, Heike, you mentioned what do you do with this? What's available with incidents and alerts? Quickly wanted to show you one of the most popular features that customers like, and that's actually driving automation and process from the SAP signals that you're receiving in Defender and Sentinel, right? And one of those features is the semi-automatic user blocking of SAP users. Yeah, but there's the full automatic stuff like Disrupt, that we're having in the platform. But SAP customers prefer the human in the loop here because you don't want to stop the most mission critical system in your landscape. And false positives can happen, of course. And you don't want to impact.
And I see you are now in Teams. So what is Teams there?
Because that's one of the popular places where you want to surface something, bring to the attention of the SOC and the SAP security team. And in here, you're actually seeing one of the analytic rules taking action and producing output that a weird transaction has been accessed by this user LXR in the productive SAP system. And if you want to now take action, you can from here. So you choose to block on downstream systems. You can choose the ERP and other SAP services, or even Entra ID if you like. And since this playbook is in use for so long, and even mentions still Azure ID on this label here.
Yeah, we know this. And then you basically block a user now and submit. Or what are you doing here with the submit button?
Exactly, yeah. You can put in a comment here, which is then fed back to Sentinel as the to have the trail on what your choice is and why. And when you click submit, actually the SAP backend user gets blocked on this.
Wow. And how does it look like in Sentinel or like in XDR now?
So we saw the action that the SOC or the SAP security team could take. And in here, you are then in the full-blown view what Defender and Sentinel together can offer.
Wow. Okay, so now I see actually there is an SAP incident. There was MFA bypassed, and you see all the different steps and the access as an alert that came from the Sentinel Connect. Wow. Okay, pretty cool.
Yeah. So in here you see the breadth of your IT estate brought together, including SAP Signal. And beforehand we saw the action that you could take on this, where you want to contain your problem. So that user did problematic stuff, so you want to block it. Now you're investigating and seeing, okay, what can I find now in this attack graph? What's the timeline on it? And having SAP here, that's really something that not many enterprises these days have yet. bringing this actually to the visibility of the team that defends your company.
Yeah, especially because there's usually other entities involved as well, right? There's a device and there is a user and there might be a Teams message, there might be whatever it is. And can you also take response actions from the graph here itself directly?
Everything that our platform has in store already can be applied. Yeah? Of course, for the SAP user blocking, you take the human in the loop approach. Yeah? But if you want to now contain like the endpoint or the device where the request came from, yeah, that's of course something you can do also. Yeah?
Cool.
Over here, for everyone who's familiar with Defender and Sentinel, this is already like what you know. Yeah? We just added the SAP flavor to it. Yeah? The rest stays the same. And that's why it's also a low friction to adopt for other teams. Yeah? If you're familiar with this, it's, just continue to roll and be amazed by the SAP signal being added to what you already have. Yeah?
So from your experience with your customers, how is this being operationalized? Like, is an SAP persona that we talked about before also using the Defender portal to look after SAP incidents? Or if the organization is big enough, the security team is looking and then pulling in the SAP persona, how does this usually work?
For instance, at Microsoft, we have a team that has its own Sentinel workspace running mostly the SAP operations there. And they selectively forward then to the entire SOC. So in there, we have to split there. That's a typical approach. Yeah? But there's others who just add it to the SOC team and they have like a dedicated person who's then filtering on the incident level by the SAP related stuff and looking after them this way. Yeah?
Okay, it sounds all pretty easy and simple, but what else do customers need to configure or edit or customize in order to get the data they want?
Great question. Let's take a look at the portal so we can see how this data connector will be connected. And it's really simple. We actually provide much of the instructions directly within the data connector UI, as you can see here. So what we're looking at now is the iFlow workflow. Similar to Azure Logic Apps, it's like a low-code, no-code platform. And it works on the basis of message being passed along the flow. And in that case, the message is a connection that is established from Sentinel. And as you can see, the flow begins over here with the sender, somewhat different than the Logic apps because the flow goes from east to west rather than from north to south. But essentially, this is the nuts and bolts of our data collector. Within here, we have a subroutine. And once the codeless connector starts polling, this will be triggered. This workflow will be triggered every 1 minute, and it will start sending data to Log Analytics.
And just to close out here, you said it's posting then to Sentinel. That's the arrow at the bottom right here, which then actually leaving this workflow pane. Yeah? So on the left, Sentinel arrives, and on the right, again goes out to Sentinel because we want to push data, right? And it's not requesting it. Yeah? Customers raised concerns initially because the integration suite runs on the internet. How do you make sure that this is set up in a way where you cannot expose data through this endpoint? Yeah? And this is how it's done. You're asking for time slices of log data, and then you're getting it pushed rather than returned to you. Yeah? So now we'll be moving over to the new features that the customers requested for this. Yeah, because one of the first things that were mentioned, this is polled every minute. Yeah? And some of the customers were saying, well, once per minute is a bit excessive to us. Yeah? Can we maybe fine tune this a bit? Yeah? And with our GA release, there was also part of Ignite announcements. We actually brought in new capabilities to have a more relaxed way of doing this. Yeah? And so let's do a quick flip back to the connectors UI and to close out that view. The customers now have these advanced options here, as I mentioned before, where you can add the polling frequency and change based on your needs. So we're already in the stage where not only changed connector, but we're also adding new capabilities and exposing this type of attributes to the customers. Like changing here how often you want to ask for it.
That's pretty cool. And what's an average that your customers configure? I mean, you got all these asks like, oh, 1 minute is too fast for us. Is there an average?
We have a good bunch of customers to just keep the defaults, and we're saying 1 minute is like best for the real time or near real time for threat protection, of course. Others are saying, well, we want to put less requests towards our SAP systems, and they are putting it up more to 2, 3, or even 5 minutes. And you have the ability to point this at different sources, right? And then you want to maybe even be beyond the 15 minutes, because it's not as critical to have the user master data or something, right?
So, Martin, I think now is maybe the time to talk about migration. So, customers have the agent installed and they want to move to the agentless version. How does it work? And you have a guide, I heard.
Yes, there's no migration these days without some help around it. And the first thing we provided for this is on Microsoft Learn, a migration guide that talks about the whys, that we also covered today, and we saw some peaks here and there on what's cool with agentless. And in here you have basically a migration path. So assess what you have done today, how many connectors that are agent-based are running, what type of logs did you add, and then run a small review, and then follow our deployment guide. That gives you the nuts and bolts, as Will put it before. And then from there, it becomes then quite simple. Just turn on agentless, see if it works. And if it does, you are ready to go to start ramping down your Docker containers, your Kubernetes clusters, etc. And that's in the ideal world, and you've already migrated. Of course, there can be customizations that you did that you need to cover, but those then surface in the assess phase and the review phase of your migration path.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, now that it get all pushed, you can configure again the time that we looked at, but it will show you all the log types and everything. You assess it, and then and then ensure that the logs are being collected in the same way. Okay. Do you have a time estimate? Is it dependent on how many log types on the SAP environment? Like how long does such a migration take? So for customers to plan when to do it and
That's a good question. Of course, we are still collecting further evidence because customers are doing this for the past months, and not everyone has migrated yet. But if you have hundreds of SAP systems and you do this on an individual basis, it creates some need to maintain an Excel sheet and see which ones have you actually already covered and which ones have been moved. But it's not gigantic exercise. And for customers that have only 10 systems onboarded, this can be really be done in a couple of days when you really do your due diligence and run in parallel for some time until you're sure everything works the same way as before.
And then I see the end is basically you stop the old connector.
Exactly, yeah. And then you've migrated.
Perfect. Thank you. So, first of all, thank you both so much for coming to the show and explaining how this is really a super excitement for customers to either now start with SAP or also for those that want to migrate and learn about it. So, any final words? And I start with you, Will, to our audience.
So I just hope that as a customer of Microsoft, you can benefit from the efforts that we've made over the last few months into producing the agentless connector. And if you haven't already protected your SAP systems, go ahead and do that because these systems are super important. There's been some really high profile breaches. We now know that attackers are looking to exploit SAP, and SAP tends to be part of that legacy technical debt, which means it's difficult to patch, difficult to maintain, difficult to secure. So these are the sorts of tools you need to start looking at, and you can benefit from either ours or one of the many partner integrations that Martin's been working on as well on the sides here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Martin, any call to action or last words from you?
Definitely, Heike. We didn't touch on some of the postmortems of SAP breaches today, but that's definitely something that's top of mind also for us. And for the latest compliance needs that customers get, especially in Europe from NIS2 and DORA, and those require to keep your SAP audit logs for a very long time. And the Sentinel Data Lake is a very simple, straightforward option to do that. Sentinel for SAP brings the alerts and incidents for your real-time needs, but keeping stuff cost efficiently for a very long time can then be done out of the box from there. So keep an eye out on all of the content we produce for this going forward also.
Yeah, good call. Thank you so much. Thank you both, and thanks everyone for watching. If you liked the episode, thumbs up, and please also add a comment, ask questions, and subscribe to our channel. And I hope to see you all soon. Thanks. Bye.